Okay, so now we'll look at as the world tries to move towards renewable energy sources or sustainable energy sources. What are some of the challenges they might that we face? Okay, so of course, the biggest being economic factors. Uh, if solar energy is 5 times more expensive than coal, there's no way it's going to be adopted, for instance. So anyway, all renewable energy sources will have to be competitive, and we're getting there fast, and almost all the renewable sources are competitive nowadays, and you'll see that in a few slides. uh, you also want to make sure that you have necessary resources. So for instance, I mean, it doesn't make sense to put solar farms in Iceland. Okay, and consideration of solar social factors. um, Nuclear energy is a great source in my opinion. It has very small carbon footprint, all in the construction stages. But some people don't like it, and we'll see some of the issues there. I mean, some opinion polls there, but it can be safe and so on. And all right, so let's look at that. So availability of necessary resources. So here's another point. As solar panels, as we adopt solar energy more and more, we will need energy storage. And so right now there's a lithium-ion batteries which can store energy. So for instance, Tesla will sell you a Powerwall, but then the question becomes: is there enough lithium to make enough batteries in the world? As you try and make the whole world run on renewable sources, and you need some rare earth elements uh, for generators and stuff like that, and um, and you need these elements for making semiconductors for solar cells. So are there enough resources in the world to produce all the necessary technologies? So here's some um, table. So what table shows you is uh, so if you made solar cells, photovoltaic cells to generate 1 gigawatt of electricity, that's remember 1 gigawatt is roughly a Hoover Dam. To run the world, you need 18,000 gigawatts, and that's a terawatt. So to run the world, what you need is 18,000 gigawatts, or 18,000 Hoover Dams is what you want. So what this table shows you, if the whole world to run on entirely on solar cells, and you were making photovoltaic cells using indium, gallium, and selenium as ingredients that go into the cells. But this is all, I mean, this is just an extrapolation of the problem, but we won't be running the whole world in solar cells. There are other technologies besides these to make solar cells, but anyway, just giving you an idea of the scale of the problem. So to produce 1 gigawatt, to make a solar farm as big as Hoover Dam, for instance, you need 90 tons of indium. The world production in 2008 was 140 tons. Okay, and to make 18,000 gigawatts, that's how much of the stuff of indium you would need. Okay. Anyway, these are just theoretical exercises. All right. So, and okay. Now here's another thing. You can use superconducting wires to minimize transmission losses. And also, for example, we need storage technology. So for instance, the sun shines during the day, but when you need energy at night, you can produce electricity during the day. And if you have a cheap enough way of storing this energy for use at night, so superconductors can so development for generators and power distribution line is an example. And also superconductors can be used for storage uh, mechanism as well, for energy storage. So But right now, superconductors are expensive in the sense that the existing superconductors have to be maintained quite cold. But if we can come up with high temperature superconductors cheap enough, then that would aid in our transition. So here's a high temperature superconductor showing you the structure of one particular high temperature superconductor. Again, in this business, the holy grail is for a what you want is, when we say high temperature, what we really want is room temperature superconductors. So we don't have to spend any money on cooling. And so here are some of the technology issues that one can face for renewable energy production. And so these are some of the points. I'll let you guys read them. Okay. Now, of course, the main factor really it all boils down to economics. Ultimately, technologies must be competitive in order to be attractive for consumers to adopt them. Okay, so some of the issues that you will face is as the world transitions towards renewable sources. Is there any cost of fuels, cost of infrastructure and operation and maintenance, and so on? Okay, so those are the two main costs. Okay, so fuel and operating costs is what we'll look at. Okay, so for instance, for a solar plant, the fuel cost is zero. The operating costs are also minimal. It really is just capital cost. Once you put out the money to build a solar power plant, you just harness energy for the next 20-25 years. Okay? So, um, so the three costs will be fuel, operating costs, and infrastructure costs to build the thing. Because so, for example, fuel cost is important for coal. If you have a coal power plant, and you have to keep buying coal and keep dumping CO2. Anyway, uh, so fuel is not a factor for hydroelectric, wind, and solar energy. So for all renewable energies, fuel costs are zero. And operating costs are relatively low as well. So fuel and operating costs are minimal for these renewables sources. That's another great thing about them, beside the fact that they have zero carbon footprint, essentially. So here are infrastructure costs. We'll look at uh, infrastructure cost is the cost to build this plant. So for instance, if you wanted to build a coal power plant, this is dollars per kilowatt capacity. And these are ballpark numbers. So what that means is, so if you want to, I go back to my Hoover Dam example. A Hoover Dam is a gigawatt plant, and that's a million times kilowatts. Okay, and the reason I write it like that is, so if you're going to build a coal power plant, a 1 gigawatt coal power plant, that would be a million times that. So it would cost you $500 million, roughly half a billion dollars. To have windmills worth 1 gigawatts to produce 1 gigawatts, you have to put out $800 million, roughly a billion. But remember, this is great because once you put out the money, which is roughly the same, operation costs is zero, or essentially zero. Fuel costs is zero. For this, when it's running, you're paying for fuel. Okay, and then on top of that, you have a large carbon footprint. Natural gas also, fuel costs are ever present. So a 1 gigawatt. So today you could build a Hoover Dam. Well, it also depends on the location, but for $1 billion. Geothermal energy is $2.5 billion. Nuclear plant would be $3 billion. Actually, it's more. And this table says it would be $4 billion for a solar power plant. But these costs are coming down quite fast. And so let me show you some newer numbers. But anyway, before we go there, so this is what it costs roughly on the average to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. Okay, so that's what this is. So coal, it costs 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour, 3 cents. And there's a lot of subsidy in the coal industry, hidden subsidies. And you pay in your so it costs them about 2.5 cents to produce, and you pay about 10 cents on your electric bill. Natural gas is a little more expensive, 4 cents. Hydroelectric, 5 cents. Now these numbers are debatable. Wind, 6 cents. And here on solar, this is 30 cents a kilowatt hour. But these prices have come down a lot. And so let me show you some new numbers. So, so what this graph shows you is that's the global average, and these are the range in 2017. So this is the range of cost per kilowatt hour for energy produced from fossil fuels, this gray area. And look at the average, global average cost. All the renewable energies, biothermal, geothermal, hydro, solar photovoltaic, offshore wind, wind uh, windmills are a little more expensive to build, onshore wind, all the renewable energy sources are competitive with fossil fuels already. Okay, so if you're going to invest for the next 20, 25 years, it would not make sense to invest in fossil fuels, uh, fossil fuel power plants, and that trend is catching up. So most of the new ones being built are renewable power plants, renewable energy power plants. Okay, so again, the global average is competitive with fossil fuel sources. So what's the cost of electricity in some countries? Like I said, in the US you pay 10 cents a kilowatt hour in your electric bill, on your electric bill. If you lived in China, you will be paying 8 cents. In India, 10 cents. It's roughly 10 cents in most places. Some countries tax much more. Brazil, you would be paying 35 cents per unit of electricity. So also in Germany. Okay. So now we'll consider some of the public opinion on some of various technologies. Nuclear energy, of course, is quite a divisive. People have strong feelings about nuclear energy, and so let's look at some of the public opinion about stuff, these energies. So, so this is the public opinion approval of nuclear power in the U.S. In the U.S., currently we have about 100 operating nuclear stations, uh, and that number, we haven't added any nuclear power plants in a while. Okay, so the percentage that oppose nuclear power has been steadily dropping since the 80s, and you know, and those that approve have correspondingly increased. Yeah. Now let's look at what happened in Japan. Well, in Japan, because of a tsunami in 2011, March 2011, uh, um, a few nuclear power plants that were right next to the ocean, on the close to the beach, got damaged, and the disaster occurred on March 11th. And here's Japan used to get a sizable portion of its energy from nuclear power plants. So you see, April 18th, 50% still supported nuclear power. May 16th, 40%. So as people saw the damage that occurred, their support waned, but it didn't go away. So again, nuclear energy, one can make it, one can build smaller plants, make safer, newer designs are much safer. And the great thing about nuclear power is it's got zero operational carbon footprint. Okay, so what is it that people care about? Okay, prices is the top. Okay, and then you want a continuous supply and protecting the environment. So people are responsible, and those are the uh, protecting their environment is one of the top three uh, concerns that people have. So of course, you can't pay an arm and a leg for energy, so cost is an issue as well. Okay, so public preference for energy technologies, and look at this. Solar, most people, this is in Europe, and this is a European Union poll, and most people prefer solar energy, wind, hydroelectric, all renewable sources. I mean, these are all renewable sources. Ocean energy, but that of course won't solve world problems. That's a niche solution. Biomass is also niche. Okay, so all the fossil fuels are at the bottom. Unfortunately, nuclear is also at the bottom, but nuclear should go up there. So this is a marketing issue. So we want to look at the environmental impact of some of the technologies. Okay, we'll look at that in a second.